And now to move from your very general, very broad perspective, very valuable to be so broad, we're going to narrow down to the particular case of music. And Jim Griffin is going to comment on your paper. Now, Jim is particularly well qualified to do that. He, once upon a time, moved David Geffen from the world of vinyl to the world of digits as Chief Technology Officer at Geffen Records. Since then, he's continued to work in music and in the process of adapting the music industry to changing perspectives. So let's hand over to Jim.
Can you hear me and see me? I'll ask that first.
Yes.
Okay, very good. Now I know you can hear me. Look, I love this paper. And what I loved about it was its provocative nature. It wasn't that it answered questions, it raised so many good ones. So that is what I will praise today, are the many great questions that it raises but does not answer. And I'm not going to provide answers where it did not either, but I'm going to raise still more questions in the spirit of the paper. And I'll say this, that one of the things that attracted me to it in the very beginning is this notion of consumption, of the word consumption. At first, I nitpicked with it, as I wanted to do, because for a long time I've been wondering what we think a consumption is and what is a consumer, and particularly in the case of music or ideas or knowledge or culture, which to me are so very important. I say that because they are the stuff that makes my life more worth living, and so I think about them deeply. But I do not think that in the traditional sense that we are still consumers of them for the most part. And I say that because there's no less of them once we're done. When I was very young, if I bought a record album, that was one more record album that someone else could not buy. I decremented supply. My consumption did. And then we would manage supply versus demand. And I have to say to you that this was, at least to my thinking, the most important meeting that we had every week at the record company was how many records we were going to ship. How many would we distribute, because we had to eat all of the returns at full cost. And so we were very, very careful about allocating the supply of music that we had built up in a warehouse, to the point where today that needn't happen at all. And very rarely does happen. We're not dealing with real objects for the most part. And so this notion of consumption continuing is a bit of a wish. And so I think that most of what we are discussing with regards to this paper and my own involvement with it is what we wish were true, as opposed to what is. And that makes sense because, of course, in California, that's what life is about what you wish were true, as opposed to what necessarily is, or wherever it is that you are. So I want to go into that for the most part. To think about who owns these things is a bit besides the point. I would say, in a way, I would rhetorically answer, who cares? And if we go backwards to the advent of libraries, say Eleanor Roosevelt's promotion of libraries in the United States, it came much after libraries started. But libraries represent our desire to equalize access to knowledge, to creativity, to art, and they introduced this concept quite a while ago that we are now addressing today. And so I think that there is a lot of asking these questions because we want not to move so quickly. Our businesses don't want to let go of the old vine. And I mentioned vines here, and I will say that during the time period I was working on this paper, reading it and thinking about what I was going to write, I was working with an economist friend in London named Will Page, who was Spotify's chief economist. And he recently left Spotify, and he's writing a book. And I guess I inspired him because its title is a phrase I gave him called Tarzan Economics. that I think we're engaged in a time of Tarzan economics, where so many business people cling to this old vine, and yet they have to reach for the new vine in order to propel themselves forward. And they really can't go forward until they let go completely of the old vine and grab this new vine and let it propel us forward. And I think shockingly to many, they can't imagine the amount of change that is inherent in this transition that's occurring. And so they very much want to cling to the old vine, even as things progress forward. And I think wonderfully, because we're talking about these papers, I should point out that there is very little difference on a fundamental level between these papers we are discussing and the music that Griffin created. In both cases, we are talking about intellectual property at most. And in each case, the same issues are raised by those who devote capital and money and other resources into propelling them forward. Shortly after I released the first full-length song online from Griffin, it was an Aerosmith track. It was in June of 1994. Not that long thereafter, the scholarly publishing industry reached out to me and said, well, you know, we're going to go through the same thing. And so we want to talk about this. We want to talk about these volumes that we've been putting in libraries that have great weight and that would hurt you if they hit you in the head. And we're moving into a world of the digital delivery of scholarly publishing as well. And so here we are, metaphor for the discussion at large, discussing papers that are discussing in some ways music, and they're both going through the very same transition. And so we have to ask ourselves, I keep a quote on my desk from Peter Drucker. And Drucker once said, the customer rarely buys what the company thinks it is selling. And I think this is one of those cases where you have to ask yourself the very deep question of, really, what is it that we are selling? Are we selling knowledge when we sell scholarly papers? Are we selling music when we sell a recording or transfer that recording to someone else's ownership or to allow them to listen to it or to give them access? And I think that's a very complicated question, a very complicated question. And I think one of the best ways I can address it is to bring up, I think, one of the kings of the music business, the old analog music business. When acoustic became electric, we kept some of its features with discs and so forth. But I was having a dialogue in a restaurant with really one of the kings of the business, Mo Austin. M-O is his first name, Mo. O-S-T-I-N. He started Warner Brothers Records and so forth. And I came to Hollywood to talk about the new digital business in many ways. And so we would have these lunches and we would discuss it. And one day he exclaimed, he said, Jim, what is the world's favorite form of transportation? And I said, I'm not sure, Mo. I guess maybe it's walking. Maybe it's riding a bike. And he shouted out, he said, no, it's the bandwagon. And he said, and my problem with you is that you are so quantitative. You are trying to keep track of every copy. And I tell you now that they used to fax me the Billboard charts on Tuesday and give me until Thursday to change them. And his point was that what became number one is what he made them think number one was. That he believed that it was about the bandwagon effect, that it was purely psychological. That people were not buying music, they were buying popularity. They were showing that they fit in, that it met some psychological need in their life, that if they believed it was the best, that it was going to attract more people to them. And so in some ways, and I guess I'll be indelicate about this, people were buying music because it helped them romantically, or it helped people think that they were cool. And they weren't really buying music, they were buying approbation or the belief that they were all together on something. And I think that is decidedly different than owning something. And in a way, it really flips things around. You know, today when I talk to people in this area, they say, yes, but how do we sell music? How do we continue to sell music in this day and age? And I think we all realize that we really don't buy much music or sell much music at all anymore. But what we do is we sell customers. We sell the crowd that music draws instead of the music itself, which is a decidedly different business in so many different ways than was actually selling music. And maybe it tells us that we were always selling the crowd that music drew as opposed to selling music itself. But I can tell you this, that the struggles that go on, I live in the Washington, D.C. area. In Washington and in Brussels and in Geneva and around the world, around the legal constructs that affect both scholarly publishing and music and a whole array of activities that fall in between, seek to preserve the old notion of having and holding things and consuming them and so forth, for, I think, largely legal and self-preservation reasons, as opposed to the blatant simplicity of those who would just have their way with it. And here, I want to bring it up. It is maybe the thing in the room that we don't talk about. And that is the Russian woman who runs Sci-Hub, who takes scholarly papers and distributes them without even a password. And she says, I'm removing barriers to science. Well, is everyone removing barriers to science? Or is just she removing barriers to science? Or are others seeking to preserve their role as middlemen in the friction-free delivery of science? I can tell you this, that lots of the legal activity that goes on surrounding scholarly papers seeks to preserve their role as a chattel, as not so much ideas, but as property that must be sold. And then we must somehow come to grips with the idea that we no longer control its distribution, that others simply distribute it. Now, for example, in the music industry, this continues to go on, and yet it does not continue with photocopies. So, for example, we know that we used to take scholarly journals over to the photocopy machine, and we would photocopy them and ignore this sign that said that it was a federal crime prosecutable for $150,000 a page. We somewhat conveniently ignore that at this point. And we may be on the way to doing the same with music. And I say that because at some point its movement is like the blink of an eyelash. It's extraordinarily difficult to even know when someone has transferred a song from point A to point B. And a deep question for us, for legal reasons, is was it a performance that was transferred, or was it an actual distribution of a recording? Because for legal reasons, these are treated very differently. And yet to the end user, they heard a song. They're not sure. Was it the transfer of digits from point A to point B that represented a copy of the thing? Or was it merely a performance of the thing that was ephemeral and is not to be counted as a transfer of the thing? And, by the way, if we add in a camera, does it become a wholly different activity? And does any of this fail to relate to what we're doing today, which is to pretend that we are at a conference?
And Jim, on that note, I feel bad about the audience because we kind of did them out of the chance to comment on the previous paper. So let's
yes. But John, just a moment. There's a funny thing. When I look at the audience, it tells me whether they're paying attention or not. Using a piece of AI, it puts an exclamation point next to their name if it doesn't think they're paying attention.
Do they know that?
Well, I'm not sure, but I mean, surely they can call up the same thing or not. Maybe they can't. But I just mean to point out that in so many ways we're just adapting, John. We're Absolutely. Just adapting to change. And we're putting labels on it and names on it to pretend that we're preserving something from the past. But really, we're just doing the best we can under the circumstances.
Very, very provocative. There was one question that I thought would, Matt, if you would promote Erica, we'd ask her to ask the question in person, if she's paying attention, which as Jim says she may have not be doing right now. But
yeah.
Is that possible? I'm getting silent.
Oh, great. Yes, I was paying attention. I don't know if I had.
There you go. Ask your question.
Well, by the way, I'm not sure if the system agrees with you or not, but I think it's okay. It's good that you were paying attention, and maybe the system recognizes it.
So fire away.
So my question is, how is psychological ownership different than from loyalty?
It suggests that loyalty would be a consequence of psychological ownership. So having greater psychological ownership is making you more reluctant to give up or give away or sell or transfer use or consumption or possession of a good.
Aha! But I want to add something.
Jim, I have
Okay,
some answers. I have some questions for your questions. So
okay, go ahead.
Yeah. Okay. So I think a really important, like the first provocative question that I hear is, what is really consumption? And you're talking about in the case before, when you had particular physical units that you would ship, that was people were consuming something. They're consuming a record or CD or tape or whatnot, right? And so there's a material good like that's being shipped and people are consuming that. I would suggest that like most marketing academics at least would think about consumption as being equally true of a record or of a song, right? Just as like I consume ice cream when I eat it, right? I don't hold on to the ice cream. There's a physical good that sort of is broken down in that point, but there's still an experience there. Just as consumption could be consumption of an experience, and it'd be hard to think about. Our framing would even flip from the other end. So consumption is the experience, and the physical goods facilitate that.
But
well,
wouldn't you also argue that you could fall in love with idea first, like become an amateur, and then want to psychologically own it by renting it or devoting yourself to it, such that loyalty comes before?
Ownership without legal possession. So people could feel like that's theirs, or they could like something without owning it. But that's we certainly would think that loyalty is enhanced by psychological ownership. Erica, is that your question?
Okay. And may I just ask another question? Just
sure.
fast.
Got the microphone.
So if how does psychological ownership relates to consequences such as being neglectful of that what you are using?
Yeah, there's a really interesting paper coming out of looking at people's propensity to be careless with their phones when they want to upgrade. Right. So if the new phone, like the new iPhone 12, I have the iPhone 11, right? So the iPhone 12 is out now, and do I no longer want to own this? There's really interesting work that people suggest that people are more careless with their goods when they no longer want to continue possessing them. I don't know if that's tied it specifically to psychological ownership or not, but that's certainly, we would expect that if people feel less psychological ownership for something. And Flora Barty and Gianna Eckhart really looked at a nice example of this in the case of Zipcar. So people who are using Zipcar don't really feel ownership of the Zipcar that they have in their possession, and they don't take very good care of it. And so we would think of psychological ownership as not the only determinant of whether or not people would care for a particular good, but it's certainly it is an influential factor.
Yeah, one comment I wanted to raise is that I think that this question of ownership can also be inverse, and I think there are concerns that I have with regards to those who possess, let's say, the digits that constitute a phonorecord or a movie or a paper and their likelihood to share that with someone else. And it seems to me that as we let go of it, that they are far more likely to share it with others, which in some ways racks away at the idea of ownership and moves towards a collective notion of lending. Again, none of this offends me in particular, but I know that it works against what the system wishes were true, which is, in general, I'll say I think so much of this misses the idea that the essence of many businesses is balancing supply versus demand and watching tightly at inventory for clues as to pricing. Because I think that's so much of a business experience that I think we are letting go of it all too quickly.
Yeah, but I think even in I would say that's true for many of these kinds of double-sided platforms, even with like Uber, for example, has to balance supply and demand, right? And that's what the business is just connecting supply and demand. But for platforms like Netflix, where you don't have like a supply problem with regard to like a particular episode of like Bridgerton, right? In that case, you could think Netflix's supply problem is the supply of content to users who satiate towards like the same content, right? So it's balancing like the live content library with demand for novelty or demand for new experiences. And so I'd say like when I'm watching Netflix, I'm still consuming something. I'm consuming a movie. I'm consuming it through my laptop or my phone or my television. So there's some kind of material manifestation there, but like it's still a consumption experience.
I'll give that to you grammatically, but I will fight you to the death that is a good view for a businessman.
I think you're thinking more about like moving away from this idea of will people own any, like how do we sell things to people to own, right? To this idea of how do we commodify the expression of identity. So consumers and many
refer to it statistically so that we can engage in intelligent discussion about it. It bothers me that one thing that really is consumption is mixed up with something else that may be a different thing statistically, and so we're not sending the same clues out to the market as business people when we lump the two together and pretend they are one.
So in this virtual performance that Jim pointed out we're doing, we are still governed by the clock. And the clock tells us that other people want this room, even though this room doesn't exist. So, Matt, I think if we could throw up the final slide, we'll just wrap things up in a second. But I really want to thank the presenters of this session because it was a great session with a very lively discussion, and I hope the discussion will continue. If you can hop forward to this slide, just to remind you that this is a presentation of a set of papers that appear in the January 2021 issue of JM, and they're all good. They all have commentaries, many more commentaries than you've seen in these presentations because we invited more people to comment than we could actually use. If you jump to the next one, you'll see the second set of papers. There you go. And as it says, 15 commentaries from marketing leaders. So I think this is a really interesting and important part of the conversation between the academy and practice, really lively. And I want to thank everyone who's participated in this. I enjoyed it, and I hope you have too. With that, I think Matt, you can tell us it's time to go.
Enjoyed it a lot.
Thanks for being here.
Thank
It's really
you.
great.